Jimi Hendrix thing, it actually had a kind of like a schmuck he was wearing, or kind of like a robe or something he was wearing, where he played a show here in Ventura, and it was right at the on the beach. And this is right. I was a little kid. I lived here, but I wasn't able to go because I was like maybe 12, or 11 or 12 or something. But some of my older friends went. But he played on like a semi truck flatbed thing with the ocean right behind him. But Ventura is like a beautiful place, and like right now it's 100 degrees all over the world, and it's 70 degrees here. And I'm not sure what it is where you are, but sometimes though, even in the middle of the summer, the fog rolls in from the ocean.
Yeah.
Go from being like really sunny and warm to like being freezing. He actually stopped his show because the fog came in and you couldn't see him on the stage, and it got all, they were going to get electrocuted. So anyway, so there's a little story behind there. If you ever go in there and look at it again, there's like a little, the little information tag.
Yeah.
Says some stuff about the show. So
that is so cool. And you know what? I'm actually going to use this as a way to jump in to my first question that I had, because I do want to talk about Forever Black a lot, because just straight up looking you right in the eyes. Yeah. You know what? It fucking kills, brother. Okay. And with all of the expectations and stuff that surrounded it, and all, to pull off an album like this is an incredible release. And so I want to make sure that we circle back and talk about that. But I want to go back to this kid who couldn't go see Hendrix but wanted to see Hendrix in Ventura, California. You guys founded in 1971, correct?
Well, it's between 1971 and 1972. We were talking about that because if it's 71, it would be next year. It'd be our 50th anniversary. But the band actually got together like even before that. We were probably playing in like 1970, but we were in another band, Titanic. Yep. So I guess the real question is officially, when did Titanic stop? And then when did we become Cirith Ungol? And when did we? So we actually did get together either around 1971 or 1972. I think more accurately, we probably got together in 71, but we didn't play our first show, if you consider like a band playing out and playing a show, until 1972. I think that would be more accurate.
So as an outsider, I never lived in California, right? As an outsider, I picture the early 70s as in California in some ways. I'm thinking the shadow of Altamont is hanging over the music scene to a certain degree. I'm picturing, Jackson Browne and the Eagles grabbing their cocaine and running up into the hills. But there's an underground and making big kind of poppy music and folk music. But there was this underground heavier scene in California. And that's the part that you guys were part of. Talk to me about what the hell it was like in those early years. Who your influences were, kind of just some of the early stories from back then.
Yeah, let me set the stage for you. Unfortunately, we had a gentleman here in our town, Jim Salzer, who was one of the original kind of cool groovy guys back from the 60s who put on a lot of the concerts. Our band, Cirith Ungol, we actually bought one of our first big amplifier. We bought an acoustic 10-inch speaker amp for Jerry at one of his stores. And then he had like for years, he had like a record store where matter of fact, he just passed away recently, but he has a record store here in our town. And the guy was kind of like a fixture in the local community. But back in the 60s, he brought Iron Butterfly, Jimi Hendrix, all of these early bands that you couldn't even, the Doors played here in Ventura. So even though we're a little town, maybe an hour north of Los Angeles, and back then it was a very small beach town. Now it's around 120,000 people, but it's still, you can actually walk from the mountain down to the water like in less than 30 minutes. So, I mean, it's a small, the downtown area is like a small area. Now it's kind of spread out a little bit. Everything in Los Angeles kind of spreads out. Yeah. So, but I mean, at one point, and about the same time, a few years earlier, my brother-in-law saw the Beach Boys. There was a local a skating rink that our band played at one of our first earlier shows, and he saw the Beach Boys there. And at our local college, they had like a basketball stadium, but kind of like not a big one like you think of on TV, but one like almost like at a high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually sat on the floor and saw Santana play like 10 feet from me, So, I mean, there's always been quite a bit of music here, but the background to the city has always been more of kind of like, it's a beach town. So it's kind of like, the Beach Boys probably would be more apt music for this area, like you said, or Jackson Brown, something like that. Although all that's true, there's always been like an undercurrent of people that listen to heavier rock, and especially during like the psychedelic time of the 60s and stuff, that was really popular, and all of these shows were sold out. Unfortunately, the gentleman Jim Salzer, because there wasn't a really good venue here, he put a lot of those shows on in Santa Barbara, right up the coast, and they had a big round building. It's called the Earl Warren Showgrounds, and it's kind of like a fairgrounds, like you would think of fairgrounds at a local county fairgrounds. But they had this big round building, almost like a dome, and they'd set up bands in there like Iron Butterfly, Led Zeppelin, stuff like that to play. Just insane.
Unbelievable. So what were the local bands that you were tapping into? Because I mean, Frost and Fire comes out in 81. You guys form in this haze of time around 70, 71. Who are you hooking up with in the interim to support before you hit that first release, right? I mean, there's a decade there where you're surviving as a band, but it must have been on local and then regional circuits. Were you hitting the road a lot, that kind of stuff?
No. And actually, I'm working on an interview right now. I've been doing quite a bit of interviews since the album came out.
Yeah.
Somebody how come you did nothing between 1971 and 1981? And the truth is, we got together in 1971. We were like 13. So we were like kids. So in that 10-year period, we learned who we were. We picked up instruments. I mean, I told the guys in the band I was a drummer, which I'm still telling people, and they're probably not. But I mean, it's like I taught myself to play drums. Yeah. And so when we first got together, I had a snare drum, I mean, all I had. And I worked and saved up and bought a drum set. And then we ended up, Greg bought some recording equipment, and we went and bought that amp for Jerry, and we got thrown out of each one of the parents' houses for playing so loud until we ended up, my sister got married and moved out of her bedroom. So we moved in there for about 8 years, and my parents were about as supportive of a heavy metal band as you could ever want it. I mean, they even they loaned me the money to record King of the Dead. I mean, they they were wonderful. And I think part of it was my dad was at work, so after school or after we graduated from school, going to college, part-time college and stuff, we'd go in this bedroom and we put a board up in the window covered in carpet, and we'd play. But we had some massive equipment back then, so we were loud. Yeah. I think at the time, though, what was cool is my sister married the guy next door to where the band room was. And so even though the houses were kind of close together, they couldn't really complain that much because we were somewhat related.
Right, so, right. Absolutely.
Anyway, so that's how that started. But how the band got together originally was me and Greg were in an English class where we were assigned to read The Lord of the Rings by J.R. Tolkien. And it had quite an effect on us at the time. And it kind of launched us into reading the other books like Robert Howard's Conan series, eventually leading to the Elric series.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of how we got our start. And at that same class, it was like one of the, I don't know where they have them up there when you grew up, but it's like, let's say the school's not big enough, they'd have a thing kind of like a mobile home, like a double wide or something. It would be like kind
of like temporary classroom that ends up staying there for 30 years.
Exactly. There you go.
Yes.
So we'd meet there, and I'm not a morning riser, but I remember this class was like the first one of the day. So me and Greg would show up there, and we'd talk about, me and him were into cars like Ferraris and Grand Prix racing at the time. It wasn't really popular, but for people that liked unusual or kind of obscure things, that for us was kind of a cool thing. And I remember he was the one that turned me on to a lot of the heavy metal. One day we were meeting there, and he whips out, his Mountain's first album, and he's going, "Hey man, listen to these guys," and I have another story which kind of blows people away. But on the other side of the school, there was a guy that had a record store, and he sold some musical instruments and stuff too, like amplifiers and some drum parts. And I remember going in there one day, and me and Greg are in there, like Black Sabbath's first album's in there, and we pull it up, and like I show it to him or he shows it to me, and I remember one of us going, "Hey, look at these guys, they look cool. What do you think they sound like?" So I mean, even though that, I wasn't there for the beginning of Cream or anything like that, but like right when all the real, what we would consider heavy metal, at least the type of music we play today, I remember being at a Sears store, picked up Deep Purple and Rock, same thing. I showed it to Greg. He goes, "Well, yeah." He goes, "I have Deep Purple's other album, their first album with Hush on it or something."
Yeah.
And I go, "Well, I wonder, you think this one's any good?" And we're looking at the cover going, "Well, the cover looks good. Let's buy it and see." And, and obviously that's an unbelievable, one of the iconic albums of the generation. So
Absolutely. My God. Yes, totally.
we had some other funny stories, because a lot of times we'd buy the album based on the album cover.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like, a lot of guys had when they're youth or, whether James Dean or whatever, they're like, robbing liquor stores or whatever. This is about the worst that we ever did. But we'd use our fingernail and we'd slit the shrink wrap on the album and we'd slide the album out when no one was looking. And look at the grooves. Real heavy music has really wide grooves because stuff with the bass, drums, and guitar has to be that. If you pulled out a thing like, let's say, maybe Carole King or, maybe folk music at the time or acoustic guitar, all the grooves, they're really super kind of smooth because there's not a lot of weird movement, for the needle to go through, right? So we'd actually buy records a lot of times if we looked at the cover and said, "Hey, this band looks good." Pull out the record and you look at,
and based on the waveform, basically of
the grooves, and so we take it home. Now a lot of times we'd get home and there'd be an album that might only have one good song on it.
Right.
And that's another thing I think a lot of younger generation don't understand. Back in the day, Black Sabbath's first album, Deep Purple's first album, those are anomalies. There was a lot of really good bands that only had maybe one or two really good songs on, with the rest, I don't want to say filler, but I mean, it wasn't the heaviest stuff. Even Mountain's album would be a perfect example. It's got Mississippi Queen, Don't Ever Look Around or whatever. Some of the songs are on there, but then it's got For Yazgo's Farm.
Yeah.
And, so we were always searching for new music. Now, Greg, we were too young to drive. Greg's dad would take us down sometimes, or my parents would drive us to Los Angeles. There was a couple of import record stores where we'd go pick up albums. Matter of fact, this one guy, he called me and Greg the Thin Lizzy Brothers, and I even made a T-shirt with Thin Lizzy's logo on it and wore it to school, because back then there was no merch sites or anything like that. And this guy, I remember walking in one day, and this guy goes to Greg, he goes, "Hey man, here's this band Thin Lizzy. You guys will like these guys. They're from Ireland, but I think you'll like the music." Same thing like Budgie. Here's a Budgie album. These guys are from Wales. You might like them. The producer produced one of Black Sabbath's album or something. So I mean, that's how we kind of we'd hear a lot of the new music. Now, what was ironic about that? We were listening to Thin Lizzy, many years before they're even well known.
Right.
I think that came about when I think Jailbreak, when they had the Jailbreak album out, Boys Are Back in Town single, and
when
stuff.
They broke through.
But same thing with Scorpions. We had Scorpions' first album, we had Judas Priest's first album, and I think the irony was we were listening to some of these bands maybe 3 or 4 years before most people in the United States even knew who they were.
Absolutely.
But that's how we kind of discovered, the music. And I think me and Greg especially had that at time. Jerry also too. But I mean, it's like we were like heavy. We wanted to be the heaviest band that we could ever be. And I'm not sure. I'll leave that to others to decide whether we succeeded. But I mean, that's always been our goal. And I think we're still to this day. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create the heaviest music that we possibly can with the group of people involved in the project. So
absolutely. I have a couple directions I want to go, and I'm not sure which one to pick. The one I do know which one I'm gonna pick. So it's funny, you were talking about as a younger individual choosing albums sometimes based on the cover art. And I think as we've moved away from the actual LP, the actual vinyl, right, and everything's shrunk down and become digital, it's lost its importance to a certain degree. But obviously for you, you had a relationship with a very, in my eyes, important artist, Waylon. Was that something, as even before kind of you get to Frost and Fire in this formative period, are you already imagining an aesthetic to accompany the heaviness of the music that you're creating at that time?
Oh, exactly. And there's a long story how we became friends with Michael Whalen and all that. But I want to touch briefly on something. Our new album just came out, and the majority of them were sold as 12-inch LPs. So, I mean, people are actually buying that again. And I remember someone, someone at the band room or manager or the record company, someone saying, hey, they're going to phase out CDs and just have LPs in addition to the streaming. And I was laughing because I said, I'm old enough to remember when they had LPs and they phased that out to make CDs.
Yes.
So in my mind, to phase CDs out to bring albums back seems almost like ridiculous. Seems like why can't they all coexist together peacefully?
Absolutely.
So I mean that's kind of where that came from. But once again, you're talking about looking at the album covers. Okay, a band from New York, Dust, they had a cover painted by Frank Frazetta. And when we were working on doing our first album, Frost and Fire, and the whole reason that album came about was we were writing songs, sending them out to record companies, trying to get some kind of recognition. Because back then, if you weren't on a major record label or you didn't have radio airplay, there was no. Now there was bands that could get, like, let's say, okay, you're Iron Butterfly, and they could play Inagata-Davida for 30 minutes before the guy goes off the air at midnight. Right. That was considered FM radio. But like still, even in Los Angeles, there was hard rock stations. And if you couldn't get your stuff on the hard rock station, then you weren't nothing. So we would send out all these series of tapes like every other band at the time, received no response. And I think at one point we decided, hey, we got to get someone's attention. How can we do this? And we came up with the idea that, hey, let's create an album with the same quality as would be a major record label would do, and let's use that as our demo. Now, when it came out, once again, the record companies showed no interest in it whatsoever. So it was like one of those movies that's like goes straight to DVD. As soon as the album came out, we were friends with Brian Slagle, who owns Metal Blade Records, our record company now, and he worked at a local record store, and he hooked us up with a company that helped distribute the album all over the world. And I think that's how I think some of our original listeners ended up not being in the United States. Now, some of the records were still distributed here, but the vast majority of them were distributed to Germany and England and France and Poland, Romania. At the time, we were getting fan mail from all over. So when that album, we were thinking about putting it out, we were thinking about what kind of artwork we should use. And I was reading, the Conan series and stuff at the time. Frank Frazetta's work was amazing, right?
Absolutely.
We wanted to use one of his paintings called Berserker, which shows a guy jumping on a horse over, he's got a sword over his head. And literally within the matter of the days or weeks of us talking about doing this, kind of like the country rock band Malley Hatchet came out with that cover on their album. And
right.
So we're just going, wow, okay, that's that, right? And we hadn't even contacted Frank Frazetta. We didn't, we were young kids, right? We don't even know what we're doing. And maybe by then we're not young anymore, but I mean, we're like, we're just out of high school trying to figure out what's going on. Greg had loaned me Stormbringer.
Oh.
Matter of fact, he loaned me the whole series, but I think he actually gave me Stormbringer first, and I was reading it, the Elric story, and I was looking at the cover, and I remember showing it to him and the guys in the band. I'm going, hey, look, this is, Frank Frazetta is a great artist, but I go, this cover right here, this could be the best album cover of all time.
Yeah.
And so everyone's all like, well, what do we do? And so I wrote the publisher and I said, hey, is there any way you can forward a letter on to the artist? And within a couple of weeks, I got a letter back from Michael Whalen saying, well, hey, you contacted me, what do you want? And we talked to him on the phone and we exchanged some, I was going to say emails. We exchanged some letters, I think, back and forth. and kind of showed him what we were doing, sent him some of our music, and he agreed to let us use his painting for our first album. And that's kind of how this ball started rolling. Now, there was a whole series of books in that Doll Book editions that came out in the 70s of all the Elric series. And I think we had a dream in the band, hey, if we get famous, let's use every one of these because these are just fantastic. And a lot of people, some of the other day said in an interview, they said Cirith Ungol, named from the Lord of the Rings, the picture from an Elric series. What are you guys? What's this all about? Well, the name was from the Lord of the Rings because me and Greg, kind of when we were reading that was an influence on us, and that's where that came from. And I think if we go back through time, the joke was if we could have changed our name to a one-syllable band name like Kith, or or
right.
Cream, or anything, the Doors, the Beatles, whatever. Because a lot of people laughed at us. They said, "Oh, Cirith Ungol, no one's ever gonna." First off, you're pronouncing it wrong, and that was another thing. Like we read the series of books, but after the Lord of the Rings, there's like several appendixes that go on for several hundred pages.
Yes.
We did not read the chapter that showed you how to pronounce all the words correctly, right? So we started calling ourselves Cirith Ungol, and then when the artwork came along, we were just looking for the greatest artwork we could find. So some of this stuff, it's all connected, but it's only connected because it's influences on the guys in the band, stuff that we loved and we were into at the time, sort of,
So the connection is internal, but from the outside, it also looks connected as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and there's still some stuff connected, The irony is when we read The Lord of the Rings, it was 3 600-page books. And for someone to pick those up and read them casually was probably like a non-starter. It'd be like reading War and Peace or something, right? And so being assigned that, when we read that, and I'm not going to say, obviously we weren't the first people that ever read it, but not too many people are going to pick that up just off, the newsstand and saying, hey, I'll read these 3 700-page books because someone said it might be good. So actually reading that at the time, had an effect on us. Now, recently someone said, hey, J.R. Tolkien does, every day of your life, is it based on the influence from the book? And actually, that was so long ago. Now, every time the movie's on TV, I'll watch it, or I'll pick up The Hobbit or something. I'll read it every once in a while just to go back and kind of refresh my memory, something I want to kind of look back over. But I mean, at the time, that was so long ago, the band's kind of moved on. But what we haven't moved on from was that influence of the heaviness and the themes of that. Every hero's got his sword, and there's always a monster to fight.
Absolutely.
And
the heroic journey, in many ways, is at the heart of what Cirith Ungol is all about, to a certain extent.
Exactly, like an epic battle between good and evil. And we kind of have like a slogan that we when King of the Dead came out, I think, we came up with this phrase, it's like the band's music reflects the darker side of man's eternal struggle. And that's kind of like what it is. It's like we're always fighting against good and evil, and you're always trying to decide which side you're going to be on, and some people pick good and they turn evil, and some people are evil and they actually turn out good, and it's always that constant, it's like
the dialectic.
Like in a Conan, Oliver, the guy that puts on the Keep It True festival in Europe, he loves Conan, and always to him it's like two snakes coming together like that.
So the other question that I had that I'm going to bring up now, and it's going to act as a segue. We could talk for 3 hours, but I want to jump, just for the sake of the listeners, to the new album because it fucking rocks, and I want to talk about that for a bit. And the bridge that I'm going to build, Robert, is when you were putting out Frost and Fire and you were putting out King of the Dead, etc., One Foot in Hell, you were operating in a terrain that really didn't have a lot of genres, right? That there was heavy rock and there was maybe heavy metal, but you were inventing. You were out on the kind of leading edge of a creative curve around heaviness.
Yeah, and
fast forward now 30 years later, you're entering a world that is filled with all these genres and subgenres and types and subtypes. And I'm just wondering what the fuck you make of that. And from somebody whose formative years were before the obsession with genres, right? And so just use that as a bridge to talk about the new album and just kind of what it's like to release an album in this landscape.
Well, let me go back once more back to Frost and Fire. When that album came out, there was a few radio stations in the Los Angeles area that would play it. And one of the heaviest stations played Frost and Fire and I'm Alive, 2 songs off that album on a night where they had like new bands. And the next day I called the guy up and I go, it's so cool listening to him play on. We were all sitting around the radio, listening to it.
Yeah.
We were saying, wow, we've made it. We're on the radio, right? And the guy goes, hey man, he goes, everyone likes your band, but your stuff is like just way too radical to play on our show. And the irony was they were playing Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and other bands, which to us were as heavier than we were. So the irony was right then is we put on that album all the songs that we considered to be our like top 40 songs, like Frost and Fire, I'm Alive, What Does It Take, Better Off Dead. These were songs we thought that would possibly get some radio airplay.
Right.
Now in the background, like several of the songs off King of the Dead, like Finger of Scorn, Atom Smasher, Cirith Ungol.
Totally, yeah.
But we were playing those at the same time, but we thought, hey man, this shit is kind of radical. If we're trying to get on the radio, we better give them, our top 40 music.
Yeah.
Now when we got the message from the radio station guys that we're not going to play this stuff, it's too radical. We decided, hey, when King of the Dead comes out, we're just going to say, we're tired of trying to please other people. We're going to pull out all the stops and play as heavy as we can. And the reason I wanted to go back to that is because every album since then, including Paradise Lost to a certain extent, every album we did, we said, hey, let's write the heaviest music that we can for this time period. And my reason for sharing that story with you is because when Forever Black came about, It was the same thing. Like, what are we going to do? And it was like, I don't know, but it's got to be heavy. And it's got to fit within the confines of what our band's known for. And that's basically the rule that we went through. I think it's always as heavy as we can get and continuous improvement. That's always been kind of like the band's motto, sort of.
Absolutely. So you get back together in 2016. I know when I saw you at Northwest Terror Fest last year, if I remember the set correctly, there were no songs from Forever Black that were in that set.
No. We weren't. And the reason, as soon as the band got back together, that's another kind of like an irony. A lot of people are like, wow, you guys came out of a time machine. And I even started making jokes. So many people said, it sounds like your new album came out of a time machine. I've been joking with people, but, it jammed and now we're stuck in your time period. We can't go back. We're like John Connor or something, like in a Trinity. Right. That was like my joke. Or another joke I said once is, oh yeah, wait, my leg's stuck in the time machine. Let me try to get the door open. So, I think the thing was as soon as the band got back together, we started writing new music.
Yeah.
One of the first songs that was completed that saw the light of the day was Witch's Game.
Yeah.
Which is a movie that we released as a single, and that's going to be on an upcoming full-length animated movie called The Planet of Doom.
Very
that
cool.
Came about when Tim found reference to that on the internet, and we had a song Doom Planet. They had a movie, The Planet of Doom. We got together with these guys, and it turned out they were fans of the band. And this movie is going to be, when it comes out, it's going to be amazing. It's like 15 different segments. There's no talking in a movie. It's all music and animation. But 15 different artists are paired with 15 different groups, and each one has a segment of the movie which tells a story. And we tell a story where Halvar, he's like Conan, he's like the hero of the movie. He's on a quest to kill this monster that murdered his wife, right? And so in the one segment of the movie we're in, he goes inside a cave and he meets this witch who reads his tarot cards. And as she reads each card, they actually go inside the card, and he has kind of like an adventure. And so that's what that whole song was about. So when that song came out, a lot of people reviewing the song said, wow, we can't believe these guys can even write music still. We can't believe they can play their music. And the weirdest thing was, we can't believe that this band sounds like Cirith Ungol. And my joke was, well, like if the Beatles broke up and then they got together 5 years later and they put on an album, would you be surprised if they sound like the Beatles? I think our biggest surprise was that people were surprised that we sounded like who we were, which actually was kind of, I mean, we laughed at that, kind of funny behind the scenes. But when the reviews for that song came out, the number one thing was like, wow, maybe these guys will put out another album, or we can't wait to hear if they have a full length record, or this is so good, maybe if they did another album, maybe we can hear some more of this. So we kind of kept that kind of on the down low. Another reason being is we had a live album come out, I'm Alive, that came out at the end of last year.
Yes.
And these two projects were kind of crossing paths with each other. And what we didn't want to do, we didn't want to ruin our first live album ever released by having something else. And so what we did is we kind of kept that just on the down low. We finished recording it by the end of the year. And then it was going to be released in coinciding with a double night appearance. We were going to play at a big festival in Europe, Keep It True, which was the first festival we played after we got back together in Europe on European soil. And because of the, this pandemic tragedy, that got canceled.
Right.
So, but I mean, that was kind of like the whole story on how that came about. But, I think you're right. And a lot of people mention how close it is to our original material. And I've been kind of speaking, just for the band on this whole thing on this. And I really believe this. Like when the band broke up, we didn't really want to. We broke up for several reasons. One of them being the music scene was changing. It's going to the glam stuff and the hair rock and the thrash metal, which was really fast, heavy metal. And none of that was kind of fit in with what we were doing at the time. So when the band broke up, I think that we were kind of more like we were forced to break up. It's not something we did willingly. It's something to be like if you go to work one day and your factory's burnt down. Yeah. You might sit in a parking lot with a couple of your friends and go, are you going in today? And someone might go, hey, it's not there anymore. I mean, that's what we looked around us in the landscape. And I've been joking too in interviews, the landscape to us looked kind of like the cover of Forever Black, where Elric walking through this wasteland with nothing. Right. So when the band broke up, I think we felt like we had some unfinished business. And so as soon as the band got back together, we started working on new material. And I think that's what any musician would do. Now, we never thought we would have another album out. Right. We may have even thought at the time, hey, this isn't going to go any farther than here. But we started working on material just because that's, I guess, then my other analogy is if you're a painter and let's say you're trapped on an island, you might actually go out and get a charcoal stick and start drawing on the cave wall or something. I mean, you'd start creating something because that's what you had in you. And I think as soon as you got the bulk of the band back together, we started trying to create stuff just because that's what we did back in the day.
Absolutely. How has the creative process changed? I mean, what was it? What was there some trepidation, or did it feel real natural going right back to it, to the creative side?
Well, someone asked me for the recipe, and I can't give out our Cirith Ungol secret recipe. It's like a chili recipe from Texas, I guess.
Fair enough.
Or a beer recipe from Seattle, like craft beer or something, right? But the honest truth is, we wrote the songs on that album almost exactly the way we wrote the songs going back through time. I was using another analogy in a lot of interviews. I'm using a lot of prosaic terms like, we forged each song like a metallurgist would craft a fine battle blade, adding a correct amount of alloys, and heating them red hot in a furnace and then pounding them until you got the correct temper, of the blade. And I mean, that's, I know that sounds kind of over the top, but that's a pretty close analogy how these songs were written. And everyone had a part in them. And I think we all, the goal was just to try to get as heavy a stuff as we could. Yeah. And as we wrote each one, we recorded them as demos. And some of those are actually, there's a Cirith Ungol box set, which has another CD, another album, which has some of the demos that we made. And once again, those are kind of like, they're very kind of crude productions. But when we write a song, we always, and we did this since day one, we'd record it down just to kind of get a snapshot of what it was at that time.
Yeah.
Now on this new album, we did 3 or 4 versions of each one, just trying, as we would update like solos or vocals or have some new ideas or might want to make a change here or there. But that's how we came up with the songs, and that's how we always did. And I think I don't like saying a lot of stuff, about our age because we're getting older, but it's kind of like it's hard to teach old dogs new tricks. And I think maybe that we're still going by the old tricks that.
Well, what I can say is that the tricks work, brother. So if the tricks work, why? I mean, the album from the opening song. First of all, what a great opener for a band, for an album that I've been waiting for a long time, to start with the song Legions Arise. It was just perfect. It's the perfect opener. But every track, right through to the last song on the album, the title track, every track is a killer Cirith Ungol song, and the album cannot be recommended enough from me. And
we played Greece. Our second show in Europe was at the Up the Hammers Festival in Athens, and one of our fans, a guy, they loved our band. He was just telling me, he goes, look, I'm not sure I want you guys to put out any more music, because he goes, if you put out an album and it's horrible, and it's like, I'll never be able to live with that, and I promised him, and I'm not sure I was able to keep the promise, but I said, look, if we put out another album, I'll guarantee it'll be as heavy as I consider our standard was King of the Dead, which is kind of like one of our, heavier albums, right? And, once again, I'll let others be the judge of that, but we tried our best. Every one of us in the band tried our best to try. And once again, we weren't trying to shoot for gold. We were shooting for the heaviness, the overall feel. And so I think we didn't want any filler on the album. And that's.
There's no filler. You hit it. You the target that you're going for, heaviness, you fucking hit it. Tim's voice too. It was so nice to see that his voice stayed right there, coming through. The whole thing is great.
That's another question. Everyone says, how did Tim keep his voice? And I guess we were in an interview once, me and him together, and he said, well, he goes, we took a 29-year break, so that helped him. Who knows? If he would have sang for all that time, maybe his voice would have been given out or something.
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to tell you and all your listeners, everyone, to go pick up Forever Black, because it's our first album in 29 years, or download it, buy the LP, the CD, because the goal is to continue forward. And if this album is successful, we have a few more tricks up our sleeves, and we're willing to pull them out if people want to hear them. And then the other thing is, I want to wish everyone to stay safe and stay healthy, because I know we're going through a very unprecedented period in the world, and a lot of people have died. I mean, many people around the world have paid the ultimate price, and hope is for all of us to come out safe on the other end, so that we can get back together again, enjoy music and concerts, and being together with our brothers and sisters in metal. I mean, that's our goal. And so that's what I would like to just reach out to all your listeners and share that with them.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone in your immediate circle and everyone in the Cirith Ungol family is doing well right now. Like you said, this is unprecedented time. So from me and for everyone who watches this video, to you guys and to you personally, I hope you're all doing well. And yes, anyone who watches this, you have got to go get Forever Black. It is an incredible release from Cirith Ungol. Robert Garven, thank you very much for taking some time to talk with us today. And I look forward, give me that one more time. I look forward to seeing you. I would kill to see you. Well, not kill, but I would love to see you guys again. And I would love to see what tricks you have up your sleeve. So yeah, let's get through this. And then I'll see you in the pits down the road. All right. What do you got?
Wait a minute. Well, it's a drumstick.
There we go. You got it up your sleeve. Awesome.